Okay, well, I want to thank you all for joining in tonight. Tonight we understood we were going to have a small class, but it's going to be a really neat class, and I plan on sending this video out to a lot of folks who probably won't appreciate it. But the topic of tonight's class is Black Panthers. We're going to talk about Eastern cougars as well, and if you guys come up with any other hard to see critters, we could talk about those as well. But Black Panthers and Eastern cougars probably take up a good chunk of my time trying to explain these animals. These are not mystical animals that don't exist. They absolutely do exist, but the moral of the story for tonight's class is teaching you where they're at and what their status is. And so without further ado, I am going to get started with the presentation. And as always, I always like to show everyone that the instructors here at Wildlife for You do have quite a bit of wildlife experience. I'm the only instructor. Stephanie Payne, who usually joins me on these classes, she is out gallivanting in the wilds of Alaska right now. And so she's sending me pictures of flying in these crazy airplanes and helicopters to faraway glaciers. So she's having fun while I'm having even more fun doing these classes. So anyway, y'all know who I am. I've been in the wildlife profession my entire career, have over 25 years working with wildlife, and I specialize in large carnivores, some of those large charismatic megafauna that we like to call them. So what I'm about to teach you is real science, folks. Okay, I'm going to start off with a disclaimer here, because inevitably you yourself or someone you will meet, whether or not they're your best friend, close relative, or complete stranger, they are going to come up to you and tell you exactly what they saw while they are out in the wilderness or in the wild. The one thing we do when we're teaching about wildlife, we're often talking about where you find them, what kind of animals are there, what you're likely to see, what you're not likely to see. The one thing I will tell everyone is I will never tell anyone what they saw. I'm not going to say this because I wasn't there. I cannot tell you exactly what you saw. However, having said that, I may oftentimes mention most likely what you didn't see. So when people come up to me with these claims of seeing these wild and exotic creatures that should not exist in that area, again, there's that 1 in a million possibility that's what they saw, but I will try to politely instruct them about the likelihood of them seeing that is probably pretty close to zero, but there's always that possibility. Anyway, that's my disclaimer, so don't get mad at me if you've seen these animals and you swear by it. Okay, one favor, before we get started, I want to ask the three of you to do me a favor and see if you can write down what I'm going to do. I'm going to put up a sentence on the screen, and whether or not you have a notepad or your phone, kind of jot it down or make a mental note of what the sentence says. So it's pretty easy. Actually, there might be two sentences. So if y'all are ready, I'm going to put the sentence up on the screen. So did you see that? If you didn't see it here, let me do it again for you. Still no? All right, last time, but this is the last time. So figure out what the sentence says. Or two sentences say. Okay, that's all I wanted. So thank you for that. We might go back to it later in the presentation, but all right, before we get started talking about, we're going to talk about Black Panthers first. And before we get started, I want us all to be quiet and to listen, because inevitably someone is going to tell you about what they heard screaming in the holler. And more than likely, let me see if I can get these to play correctly. More than likely, here is an example of what someone may have heard in the holler. Let's see. I've got to shrink some videos. All right, ready? Have a listen. Hopefully this will be loud enough for you. Pretty spooky animal that is quite often heard in the hollers of the eastern half of the United States, all over the United States, actually. Or let me play a different one. Let's play this one. Oh, it would help if I turn the volume on. Come on. It might be a little low, but all of these sounds that you hear all right, all of those sounds you hear are, oh, so one of them is still playing. They're typical sounds that you could hear in the middle of the night, sound kind of like a woman screaming. And like I said, invariably, you're going to meet someone that says, I heard a Black Panther. It sounds like a woman screaming in the night. And my first question that always boggled my mind, at least, was, why is it a Black Panther? Why couldn't it just be like a panther in general? I don't understand how people can hear colors, but they always call it a Black Panther. But here, get a load of this. If you want to hear a Black Panther, if someone was truly hearing a Black Panther, this is what it would sound like. So those are true panther calls. That was the sound of a jaguar, which is a Black Panther, and I'll get more into that. But the funny thing is, whenever people describe to you what they hear in the middle of the night when they hear a Black Panther, is usually a woman screaming in the background. If you are able to hear those first calls that did sound like a woman, that was either a red fox or a bobcat. And so they're easily explained. The problem is people automatically jump to those worst case scenario conclusions. And for the most part, they're hate to say it, but they usually get it wrong. So anyway, just wanted you to listen to the true sound of a Black Panther versus what most people report they hear. So again, my first question is, why do people always jump to Black Panthers? And secondly, well, what exactly are Black Panthers? So when you, sorry, I'm trying to get my screens back up. I don't know where they went. Give me 1 second. Where's my chat? There it is. Okay. So what are Black Panthers? And forgive me if you've seen this slide. I've used it recently, but Black Panthers are simply the melanistic version of either two cats that are found in the genus Panthera. They're either the leopard, which is found in Africa and Southeast Asia, or they could also be the melanistic version of the jaguar, which is found in South America and Central America primarily. And so people reporting seeing Black Panthers in North America, right away, you know that that's probably not the case unless it's someone's pet, an exotic pet that has escaped. And so for the most part, free-ranging black panthers are not going to be found in North America. And usually right away, someone will say, oh, well, it's not a jaguar, or it's not a leopard. I saw a black mountain lion. And the problem with that scenario is it is believed that mountain lions cannot carry the gene that carries melanism. And so there has never, ever been a black mountain lion or a black cougar in documented history. And so any way they slice and dice trying to explain that they saw a black panther, unfortunately, it's falling into dead ends where it really should not be occurring. And so it's difficult because it's easy to refute from a scientific standpoint, but when people are seeing these things, it's hard for them to understand that their eyes may have been lying to them. But let me jump back to this whole jaguar side of things. Remember, jaguar is a large cat in the genus Panthera. It's Panthera onca. And I mentioned it's primarily found in South America and Central America. If you're sharp and you've followed me for long enough, you do know that a jaguar has actually been spotted. Actually, a couple of different jaguars have actually been spotted in the far southwestern portion of the United States, along that Arizona, New Mexico border, but right along the Mexican border. And so there actually has been documented jaguars within the last decade or so that come up through that population in Mexico and do make it into the United States. So having said that, technically, a black panther can exist in the United States, correct? And if you went that far and tried to trap me in a corner, I would give you a ton of credit, because that is absolutely correct. There has been a jaguar or two spotted in the US. And like I said, jaguars can carry the melanistic gene. However, here is my out for that discussion. There's a paper, or there was some studies done regarding the evolution of the big cats and the cats that carry melanism, more specifically the leopards and the jaguars. And if you were to read the paper, literally what it says is the black version of these, the melanistic version of the jaguar, the black panther, it is most commonly found in deep, heavy forested jungle areas. And so areas that have lots of shadows and don't get a lot of sunlight to the forest floor, that is where you will find those melanistic versions of the jaguar. So if you look to see where the jaguar is in Mexico and the United States, this is its habitat. It is wide open desert. It is really hot. Imagine going down to southern Arizona, northern Mexico, and just trying to survive in temperatures that could range up to 100, 110, maybe even 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and you are wearing a black coat all the time. It is not conducive for that animal to exist in that type of environment. And so the odds of a black jaguar being in North America, again, I can't say it's impossible, but it's extremely, extremely, extremely rare. So my question is, although lots of people claim to have seen black panthers, what are they seeing? And I will tell you, like I said, you don't really have to go far. If you talk to a lot of people that spend time in the woods, you're going to run into someone that has seen a black panther. I don't know why it's more prevalent on the East Coast, but it tends to be. And so I've come across in my career, I've come across a number of people that were really dead set on, this is what I saw. You got to come out and investigate it because I know I saw a black panther. And so one time, and this is in Tennessee, and I'm going to use Tennessee as a big example because that's where I used to work. But I had to visit a landowner one day because they were constantly talking about the black panther that visits their property. And typically we try to explain to them over the phone exactly what's going on, but this particular landowner reached or had connections to the governor of Tennessee. And so I was instructed to go out there in person and talk to her and see if I could help her out. And so I ended up putting a trail camera on the back part of her property where she claims this Black Panther would show up in her field. And going through the pictures one day, she looked at it, she says, there it is. And she showed it to me. And I was like, huh, there's something in that field that wasn't there before. And the more and more I looked at it, the more it looked to me like it was just like a little blackbird or some kind of cowbird or some small dark colored bird that was just flying across the field that I just happened to catch it in flight. But then I did something crazy. I flicked through the next series of pictures, or I found this series of pictures, same area, but look in that same spot, that far back right corner, and you can see a little black dot. And I don't know if you can see it moving, but you can see something way back in that field that was moving through the grass. And it's dark and it's of significant size given how far away that was. And so that led me to really question myself. So ended up putting more cameras way in the back part of the property, left them out for a couple of weeks, and I finally got this on camera. I'm like, huh. And if you can see it, it's some kind of yellow lab. So thinking, well, maybe this could be it. But the problem is it doesn't explain the black coloration. Well, guess what, folks? He was joined by his friend. And so we had a golden lab and a black lab that would always come out into this field late evening. She never reported seeing the golden lab, but she would just see the black lab moving way off in the distance. And again, I've mentioned, if I mentioned this once, I've mentioned it 100 times. People always try to assume the worst case scenario, and I'll talk about that, the reason behind that. But they always try to think of the scariest animal possible that it could be. But in this case, it was simply a black lab. Well, lo and behold, that same landowner the following year said, well, I finally got a picture of the Black Panther. And she sent me this photo. And at first I was looking, and then I saw something down there, which is what she was referring to. And let me zoom in on that. If you look, it does appear somewhat cat-like, and it does appear somewhat large. And so it got me thinking, well, I got to figure out what this is, because she is still going to be assuming that there is a Black Panther wandering around her property. So believe it or not, at the time I was working with Stephanie Payne quite a bit, and I invited her to join me to set up some cameras. And what had happened was there was a cow that had died on their property, and this quote unquote Black Panther was coming to feed on it. And so we set up cameras all around the carcass of that cow. And a week or so later, we went to check it out, and this is what we found. If you can't tell, that is a melanistic coyote. And so right away, I was pretty sure that I had the culprit that she was assuming to be the Black Panther. And so I kept looking through the photos, and lo and behold, the very last photo of this melanistic coyote, you see it standing there in the bottom right-hand corner. Now look at the original picture of the Black Panther. If you look on the chest, you can see a white blaze on the chest. In fact, I'll circle it here. At first, I thought that was just vegetation that was obscuring that animal. But if you look at that, and then you look at the blaze on the coyote, they matched up perfectly. And so as soon as I showed her that and the white blaze, it finally clicked, and she's like, oh, I guess I could be right. So lo and behold, it was not a Black Panther. Anyway, when it comes to Black Panthers, again, if you spend enough time talking to people, especially if they're outdoors, or a lot of times you will hear the hand-me-down stories of someone's grandfather or pappy or whatever they call them, hearing the Black Panther in the holler. Oftentimes they'll tell you about how they saw the Black Panther. Again, I cannot tell you what the black cat was that you saw, but I can tell you what it most likely wasn't. Because remember, Black Panthers are not native to North America. If there is a true Black Panther out there, it's going to be someone's escaped pet, which can happen, but it's extremely, extremely rare. But hopefully people will understand, and I know they won't, but Black Panthers just are not a free-ranging animal in North America. So the second half of this talk, I wanted to talk a little bit about Eastern cougars, and I know some of you get sick of me hearing about, or me talking about this. But I do want to mention it because they kind of go hand in hand of people seeing these critters and talking about these critters living in places that they really shouldn't live. So let's talk about cougars in general at first. And again, I know some of you have seen this slide before, but if you look at the cougar range, they were the most widespread terrestrial animal in the Western Hemisphere. They ranged all the way from the southern tip of South America all the way up to pretty much the Canadian border. They do extend a considerable distance into Canada, but they covered every square inch of that South American continent and most of the North American continent in the 1600s. And so they were everywhere. The problem is their current range is drastically different. If you look at their current range, this is what it looks like. And so you still see that they pretty much occupy almost all of South America and the vast majority of the western half of the United States. So the question is, what happened to cougars in this area? Why are they gone from that eastern half of the United States? Well, it doesn't take much digging to look up kind of the historical records for cougars or mountain lions. And like you can go way back into into the BC era, but believe it or not, what I found was interesting. The reason I put this up, it's believed that in the Pleistocene, about 10,000 years ago, well, actually more than that, it is believed that cougars were completely extirpated. They were gone from North America in the Pleistocene. They still survived in South America, but over the next 10,000 years or so, it was believed they recolonized. They moved up from South America all the way into North America. And then something happened in the early 1500s, and that was this Eastern European invasion that I talk about quite a bit. But it was documented in the records in the early 1500s. A Spanish explorer first documented encountering a cougar in North America. And so what happened after that is truly pitiful, because you see in the 1500s, after they discovered cougars, there was pretty much an all-out war declared on them. And so it began with Jesuit priests that offered a bounty to any Native American that killed a cougar. And it just snowballed from there. Moved all the way to the eastern half of the United States, obviously with the colonies forming. And so there's more and more bounties placed on cougars. And because that Eastern European invasion started on the east coast of North America, one by one, those states were killing off their cougars. And so cougars were extirpated from most of those eastern states a long, long time ago. We're talking 100, 200 years ago. Now you look up each individual state when the last cougar sighting was, and it varies tremendously. Again, I always refer to Tennessee because I know the most about Tennessee, but it was about the 1920s when the last documented cougar was confirmed in the Smokies. If you've ever heard of the Sparks cabin in Great Smoky Mountain National Park, the descendant of the Sparks cabin was the last person to kill a cougar. In fact, he got into a tussle with it, actually. But unfortunately, because of this all-out war on cougars, they did not survive in the eastern half of the United States. So pretty much all the way from the Midwest east to the Atlantic Ocean, They were gone, except for that small population near the Florida Everglades. And so they were wiped out. Literally hundreds of years of persecution, and they were gone. And I do want to say a big welcome to Moth. She just joined us. Moth was one of my swap students in Tennessee. So thanks for joining in, Moth. Anyway, if you look at that picture, and feel free to unmute yourself if you want to, but does anyone know what that is a picture of? It's a fairly famous picture. If not, no biggie. What this is a picture of, it was believed to be one of the last quote unquote Eastern cougars before Eastern cougars were completely decimated. And in fact, the Fish and Wildlife Service went so far as to do this exhaustive search throughout all of the eastern states, trying to find if there's any existence of Eastern cougars. Now, I will tell you, this was back in 2011. I will tell you that back then they were classified as a separate subspecies from the Western cougars that we all know about. And so there was literally a decades-long search for any evidence, any sign whatsoever of cougars existing east of the Mississippi. Decades, researchers, people, cameras, looking for any evidence whatsoever. And unfortunately, they couldn't find any, again, outside of that Florida Everglades population. And so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decided to claim the Eastern cougar extinct. And this was supposedly the last known photo of an Eastern cougar that was killed. And so there's a big argument or debate within the biological world about whether or not they're actually extinct. And the funny thing is, the argument now is through genetic work, they found out that the Eastern cougar and the Western cougar, there really is no difference between the two subspecies. They're pretty much exactly the same. And so you can't really declare that Eastern cougar extinct if it's the exact same cat as the Western cougar. So it's a convoluted mess. It's one of those things where genetics is a great thing, but it kind of messes up everything we've learned previously. But it's a good thing because we're sorting out some of the things we couldn't understand in the past. Patricia asked a question if that's the one that traveled from the west to the east into Canada and then New England. No, it is not. That cat, in fact, I'll show you that cat's travels here in a little bit, but that was a Western cat. Its lineage or DNA traced it back to the Dakotas, but that was in 2011, made an incredible journey across the northern Great Lakes states through New England, ended up getting hit by a car in Connecticut. But anyway, going back to this so I could move on here. Fish and Wildlife Service declared Eastern cougars extinct, but after that genetic work was done, they're not really separate from the Western cougar. So again, it's just a convoluted mess when it comes to the genetics of these cats. It's pretty much only one type of cat in North America. So this map currently shows it gives you a decent idea of where you find cougars. So the dark green areas is where we have breeding populations of cougars. So we have pictures of them. We know they're reproducing. We see female cougars with cubs. That middle area in the Midwest, you see the hash marks or the hatch marks. That is where the cougar range is expanding. And so there is absolutely no doubt there are cougars in those areas. The one thing that's questionable, though, is they have not really documented reproduction in many of those states. They get pictures of cougars quite a bit, but they have not documented reproduction. And then you move to the eastern half where it's completely white. That's where we have no records of cougars for a long time, except that Florida Everglade population. Hey, Trish, glad you can join in. Can you mute your microphone, please? Thank you. So this is the same kind of map where this whole dark area, this is all cougar range. All these points is where they are now documenting cougars moving into these Midwestern states. But you'll see a couple of things that are really interesting. Patricia, you mentioned that cat that ended up in the New England states. That came out of the Dakota region, came across through the Great Lakes. We don't know its exact travels, although there were some signs left here and there through Ontario and in New York, but it made one heck of a journey. And the crazy thing is, or the sad, unfortunate thing is, it was struck by a car in Connecticut and killed. But its genetics trace back to the Dakota population. So how it made the journey, why it made the journey is still a bit unknown, but it was a wild cat that ended up way over there. Another one that I'm very familiar with, in fact, I'll go into more detail here. In 2015, there was a cougar that showed up in Tennessee, again, the state I'm most familiar with. And so it was pretty crazy because for the longest time, I was looking for cougars throughout most of my career. And I ended up moving to New Mexico, and literally probably about a month after I moved to New Mexico, a cat finally showed up in Tennessee. But that was another surprise east of the Mississippi. But both of those cats, whether or not it is the Connecticut cat or the Tennessee cat, both of them had lineages that trace back to the Black Hills or the Dakota area. Now, there have been cats. There was a cougar killed near Lexington, Kentucky, and people talk about that, about cougars being in Kentucky. The cougar that was killed in Kentucky was shot by the state wildlife officers. I don't know why. I was pretty PO'd when they shot it, but upon necropsy, they found literally no parasites within the intestine. Tell me how a cougar that is feeding on a carcass for days and days, surviving on feeding on dead animals, has no parasites within its intestinal lining. So pretty much everything pointed to that being a captive cat that just got loose, but no one ever ended up claiming it. Okay, another big event was there was a cougar that was killed on the Alabama-Georgia line in 2008. And that one did not trace back to the Dakotas. That one actually traced back to being one of those Florida cougars, which many of you know they're on the endangered species list because they're that very, very small population. The person that actually killed that cougar, he was fined, I think it was like $12,000, and was on probation for a couple of years for killing an endangered species, which I thought was fantastic. So anyway, yeah, that cat came out of the Everglades. So the bottom line, the reason I'm showing this slide is range expansion is real. Cougars are moving into that eastern half of the US. You don't have to classify them as eastern cougars. They're western cougars. They're just cougars, but they're the western cats that are just now heading eastward. So there's always that chance of a wanderer here or there. So unlike the Black Panther situation, where I will tell you almost unequivocally that you did not see a Black Panther, there is an outside chance that you could see a cougar in the east, but I'm gonna qualify that here shortly. So I recently pulled this slide from a mountain lion workshop I just attended a few months ago. One of the better slides because it has more distinct boundaries where their current range is. And you can even see the shading where the darker the gray shading, the more cats you'll find, and it gets less and less and less. And it does extend all the way to the eastern half of, or the western half of Kentucky and Tennessee. So odds there's no cats there now, but there is a possibility of them moving there in the near future. All right, so wait a second, wait a darn tootin' minute, actually, because as much as I talked about people seeing Black Panthers or telling stories about Black Panthers, there are people all over the East that see cougars. You go on any hiking page, any Facebook page that's a wildlife page in the East, and you bring up a topic of a cougar in the East, and somebody is bound to see one. And so what I wanted to do is just talk about a little case study. Again, I mentioned it to you just a few minutes ago, how I was looking for cougars for 15 years in Tennessee, never could find any evidence of them. And then I moved to New Mexico, and lo and behold, one shows up on a photograph, on a trail camera, excuse me, in September of 2015. Again, shortly after I moved to New Mexico. And so there's the photo of it. It is unequivocally a cougar, because you could identify obviously the long body. You can't see the face, but a telltale sign is that black tip on its tail. So we knew without a doubt it was a cougar photo. The next thing we had to do is verify that the photo was taken where the person claimed it was taken. And so we went out there to the exact spot. Yes, everything matched up. We actually had a cougar in Tennessee. But if you look, let me go back. If you look where it came from the West. The biologists in Tennessee, myself included, we used to take bets on where the first cougar would show up in Tennessee. And most of us were betting in the western portion. A few were betting it would come up the Appalachians from that Florida population. But I won the bet because it came in that northwestern portion of Tennessee. Again, crystal clear picture. We knew it was there. Then the cool thing was we started tracking this. No, we didn't have a collar on this, but we started documenting more and more cougar photos that were coming in, and they were coming in a chronological order where we were watching this cat literally move eastward across the state. And so kept getting really, really good pictures of it. The cat kind of settled down along the Tennessee River. We got a number of pictures of it hunkering down in the Tennessee River area. Kind of overwintered there, and then sure enough, he got up and started moving again. So he was within the state of Tennessee for just under a year, and we received 9 pretty crystal clear photos of this cat whenever it traveled. And so it was really cool because we documented this cat. Unfortunately, it disappeared right along that border. Never got pictures of it in Alabama. We presume that the cat was killed, whether or not it died naturally, or more than likely someone killed it and did not report it, but it just stopped. For about a year, we were getting consistent photos of this cat. And so you can imagine me being the cougar guy in Tennessee. As soon as this cougar shows up, everyone was claiming, we told you all along that cougars were in Tennessee. We finally proved it. And so my question to them was, these photos, did that prove that Tennessee had cougars all along? And I would argue the complete opposite. It actually proved that they did not exist all along, because here's the thing. Y'all know what that is. That's a trail camera, and I'll explain that in a second. But when one cat showed up in that northwestern portion of the state, we then got 9 pictures of that cat as it moved. We pretty much knew whereabouts it was over the course of the year, and that was one cat. Where are all the pictures of all these other cats that they say exist in the state of Tennessee? And so the fact of the matter is, the reason I put that picture of the trail camera up there is we did a little, it wasn't a very professional study. It was just a kind of feel-good study that we did with some of the hunters in Tennessee to ask them how many trail cameras they use. And we calculated, based on the number of hunters and the number of cameras they used, that there was probably between a quarter of a million to a 500,000 trail cameras spread out across the state of Tennessee. That would put about almost 4 cameras per every square mile. And so the likelihood of a large mammal like a cougar being able to traverse the state of Tennessee without getting detected or photographed by these trail cameras is pretty much non-existent. You have to understand, cougars are wide-ranging animals. They don't stay in one spot. If it was an animal that, say, lived in like a half a square mile area its whole life, there's a chance if there's no cameras there that it will go undetected. But when you have a cougar that wanders like crazy, especially given that trail there, he's covering tremendous amounts of land. The odds of him coming in contact with those trail cameras it's going to happen. And that's why we were getting so many pictures of this cat as it traveled. And so, again, I think all of this proved that there were no cougars in Tennessee. And after that cougar disappeared, just so you know, the last photograph of that cougar was back in 2016. There hasn't been one single iota of evidence of any other cougar in the state of Tennessee. But talk to people there, and those pictures prove that they live in Tennessee, and I will argue the opposite. So what about all those thousands of cougar observations? The people are seeing something. And I tell you what, if there's a phrase that I've heard more than anything, is I saw it with my own eyes. Well, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about your eyes, because people trust their eyes, and it's pretty easy to prove that your eyes are probably not something you should trust. So, for example, let's start with Steve Buscemi. Many of you know who that is. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the picture of Steve Buscemi, and I'm just going to bring it in, but I'm going to flip his picture upside down. So we have two pictures of Steve Buscemi, left and right. Left, he's right side up. On the right-hand side, he's upside down. But it's the same picture of Steve Buscemi, correct? Well, not so fast, because look. That is a crazy, awkward picture of Steve Buscemi, but when he was facing the other way, your eyes couldn't really, at least put it this way, I can't speak for everyone, but my eyes couldn't detect that. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a normal picture of him just upside down. But when you flip it right side up, you're like, wow, my eyes were deceiving me just a little while ago. So it casts that shadow of a doubt that things aren't always exactly what they are even when you see them with your own eyes. So think about this. Many of you, or if you're a normal person, you probably like magic tricks, or at least you're captivated by magic tricks, and you want to figure out how a magician does all of his tricks. So if you ever go to a magic show, or as a little kid, if you've ever seen a magic show, you go there trying to figure out how the magician is doing his tricks. And the problem was, if he was a good magician, he fooled you. His sleight of hand, he was able to do things that did not make sense, that could not possibly be real. And so even though your brain was saying that's not happening, your eyes were still fooling you because it looked like it really was happening, even though you knew it wasn't. Now, consider this. You are trying not to be fooled, and you're still getting fooled. Now, imagine your brain helping your eyes see what you're hoping to see. And where I'm going with this is, when you think you see a cougar, automatically your brain is trying to convince your eyes that, yes, you are seeing a cougar. If you ever listen to our podcast, Stephanie and I talk about this quite a bit, in that throughout humans' evolution, when we were living on the landscape with the wild animals, it was a rough existence. And there were a lot of dangerous things out there that could kill us. And so our ancestors, thousands and thousands of years ago, had to have their head on a swivel. They always had to look out for those animals that could cause them harm. And so over time, over thousands of years, our brains evolved to find the danger as quickly as you can, because that's what allowed us to survive. If we can spot danger quickly, we could avoid danger. If we saw something and our brain didn't put two and two together, and it was a bear or a wolf or a cougar or something in the bushes and our brain's not recognizing it, then we don't survive too well. And so we evolved to see those big, scary things. And so our brain is working against us to spot those. So does anyone recognize this photo? I don't have the video, but has anyone seen this video clip before? Either unmute your microphone or type it in the chat box. This was a video clip of a reporter. I think she was in Utah. I should have looked it up, but she was in Utah reporting on some incident. You can see it's late at night. And as she's talking to the camera, this animal starts walking to her. And she's thinking, oh my gosh, there's this animal walking towards me. I don't know what it is. And she keeps talking and the animal walks right by her and disappears. And she was a little freaked out. But the thing that was crazy is they played this video clip on so many news stations, on so many Facebook pages. And what do you think half of the people were claiming it to be? Of course, they were claiming that was a cougar that just walked by her. And so literally, I'm not lying, there were hundreds of thousands of comments, and about 50% of them were saying it was a cougar. The other half were saying it was a dog. So the cool thing with this particular story, and the reason I put it up there, is we knew exactly what it was because the owner of the dog reached out to the news station and said, just so you know, that was my dog that walked by the reporter. And so right then and there, you have hundreds of thousands of people that see a dog and they truly believe that they were looking at a cougar. And their eyes, and every one of them will say, I saw it with my own eyes, but guess what? Your own eyes ended up lying to you. So that, my friends, and I don't want to cast doubt into anything you do, but that is why eyewitness accounts cannot be used as proof of the existence of these animals in places that they're not known to exist anymore. And I'll do that again in case you didn't see it run across the road. But when you see a flash like that, someone's going to say, oh, that kind of looked like a cat. I think I saw a long tail. I think it was brown. They start putting together the picture to paint themselves to see an eastern cougar when we know that they have not existed on the landscape for a long time. So the bottom line, if we can't trust our eyes, at least we can trust the news agencies. And I say that with a grain of salt because I have gotten into battles with a couple of different news agencies for some of the stories they publish, and it drives me nuts, and I'll continue to fight them. For example, this was a screenshot of a news story out of DeSoto, Mississippi. It looks like a big cat. It was actually a house cat that was in the fields, but this was a panther or a cougar that was spotted in DeSoto, Mississippi, which ended up being a house cat. But for a good part of my career, I was known as the cougar detective. And so remember, as a biologist, I wanted to find evidence of cougars. But the problem was I could not say we had a cougar, a true legitimate cougar sighting, unless I had irrefutable evidence. And so I'll show you an example of the irrefutable evidence that people sent me. They would send me this picture and say, I got a picture of a cougar. And then they'd show me that little dot. And it's like, I'm sorry, I cannot take that as evidence. Another one, I love this picture. They're like, I picked up a cougar on my trail camera, and I'm like, well, I can't tell if that's a cougar, but you sure have one big honking raccoon in the tree. But here are the typical pictures I would get when I was working in Tennessee. It was like, oh, I got it. I got a picture of the cougar on camera. I'm sorry, but that's not going to cut it. Nor is this. More than likely, this was a house cat. But these are some of the photographic evidence that they would send me. I don't understand why they can't get clear pictures of cougars, because everyone living in the West could get a clear picture of a cougar. My favorites are when they send me this and say, see, I told you there's a clear picture of a cougar, and you have to explain that that's a bobcat. This is also a bobcat, as well as this, but these were all claimed to be cougars. And so I think the most frustrating thing, and I understand, I've studied and lived and worked with wildlife my whole life. So it frustrates me because I know what these things are. And I totally understand that someone that is not used to being around wildlife could be confused, may not know the difference between a bobcat and a cougar. But the thing that really, really irks me is I'm trying to educate people, trying to teach them what the different cats are like. And all of that gets erased and completely obliterated when you have local news agencies that are posting pictures of house cats and calling them mountain lions. Because this was taken in an area that, of course, we don't have mountain lions, but then everybody in that area suddenly believes because it was on the news, we have mountain lions roaming the countryside. So it's just really frustrating. But I will tell you, occasionally there was some really, really cool pictures that were sent to me. This was one that I was like, huh, because again, this is in Tennessee, and this was a long time before that cat made its way to Tennessee. And they sent me this photograph, and as you can see when you zoom in, it looks like a cougar. And so it really had me stumped. And I was really wanting to prove that we had one. Again, I was excited. I wanted to find one. And so before I made any leap of faith, I asked the person to send me other photographs from that same camera, especially if they had other animals in it. And so he did. He ended up sending me a picture of some deer that he took. You can see his exact same camera location. And so what you can do is you can overlay or superimpose the two photos onto each other. And everything lines up perfectly with that log going across the bottom. But suddenly that cougar that should have been a fairly large cat is now something that can easily walk underneath the legs of that deer. So it turns out to be either a house cat or potentially a bobcat. But it was much smaller than we originally anticipated. So anyway, it was really fun investigating those things, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time doing that. So with that, I'm going to summarize, and then we can share stories. We could talk about things. You can call me a jerk because you saw one with your own eyes. But anyway, summary, when it comes to the eastern cougars, you have to understand they've long been extirpated from the eastern half of the United States, obviously, except that Florida population. They are making their way back, which is really exciting. But the thing with cougars, and it's not just cougars, it's with wolves, bears, those big scary animals, they captivate the mind, and therefore they captivate the eye. And so it explains a lot of the sightings, because most of the time it's just a quick sighting, something ran across the road late at night type of thing. But yeah, usually it's easily explainable what people saw. But when it comes to Black Panthers, I'm just going to say no. You did not see a Black Panther. The odds of someone losing their pet Black Panther is pretty much non-existent. So I'm just going to flat out say no on that one. Anyway, okay, remember this thing for the folks that joined in right at the very beginning. Does anyone know what was stated, the sentences that were stated in there? Unmute yourself if you know. Patricia, were you going to say?
Yeah, I was. It's nobody's going to call me a liar. I know what I saw.
So very close. But your mind will fill in extra words.
A liar. Okay.
Yeah, and so it's just a neat little trick. There's so many different little tricks that you can see where your eyes can easily be fooled. And so whenever someone will say, I saw it with my own eyes, I totally get that. I know you saw it with your own eyes. The problem is your eyes can deceive you, and it's easy to prove how easily your eyes can be deceived. So, all right, I think, what do I got here? Oh yeah, your mind tells your eye what you want it to see, and it oftentimes fills in the gap. So photo credits, had a lot of folks that donated some photos, and I use photos from here. Appreciate them. Y'all know my website and my Facebook page, so keep visiting us. But for the most part, I am done. Huge thank you. So let's share stories, or like I said, you can call me a jerk if you want. But if anyone has any questions or stories they want to share, please speak up. And go ahead. You can type it in the chat box, but you can just go ahead and unmute your microphone. Just curious, I should have asked this at the very beginning, but has anyone ever seen, has anyone ever saw a cougar either in the east or in the west?
Daryl, this is Patricia. I have. My husband and I were out in California. And,
thank you for saying California.
Yeah, and we used to live in Florida, and when we were up in Mayaca State Park, there were reports of a sighting, and we saw tracks, but we didn't actually see the cat.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of what I do nowadays, when people have these the evidence of having a cougar like in the east, oftentimes they'll send a picture of a track, and a lot of times the tracks are terrible looking tracks, but some of them right away you can tell that they're canine tracks, or just not the right size. So they're trying, and I understand. I think it'd be tremendously exciting to see one. I will tell you, Patricia, you are one up on me, because I have not run into a live cougar while on the trail, but I have worked with a couple of the cougar biologists, and we've visited cougar kill sites and took measurements, but usually the cat was long gone before I got there. So hopefully one day I'll run into one.
Well, fortunately, we were not exactly on a trail. We were coming out of Point Reyes National Park, and we had seen one. Actually, we had seen one on the trail, but it was quite a distance off in the field and went in the opposite direction of what the people were going. But as we were in the car going back to wherever we were, there was one that was resting on the hillside next to a canal that was next to a cattle farm.
Gotcha.
And so we stopped to take a picture.
Yeah.
But we took the picture from the car.
Yeah, that'd be, hopefully it didn't get into the cattle.
Yeah.
I do know that it's a contentious topic, and heck, that could be a whole nother issue. But I know many folks. I love predators. I want apex predators on the landscape. But when it comes to living with those animals, if you have something at stake that could be lost, if you're a farmer and you have livestock, it can be a scary adventure living amongst those apex predators. So anyway, no other questions or anything? Well, you guys are easy today. Well, I thank you for joining in. I knew it was going to be a really small class today, but I don't mind those small classes. I like the intimacy they offer. But huge thanks to everyone that joined in. And just so you know, I think I was telling Patricia earlier, I'm going to do a couple extra presentations in the coming month. They'll not this Sunday because it's Memorial Day weekend, but the following Sunday, we are going to do a presentation on my recent swap adventure in Tennessee. One of the students, if you didn't hear, Moth, they were one of the students on our trip. And so they were absolutely fantastic. I couldn't speak more highly of the students that we had on our trip. And you will get to see a slide presentation of all the different things we did each and every day. And most of them will be joining us on that Zoom presentation. So thank you for joining in, Moth. I appreciate it. Other than that, one last announcement. The next presentation, it's going to be a repeat. And I apologize for that, but we're in the peak of bear season with so many people running into bears in the Smokies and Yellowstone that I'm going to do another language of bears class, and I'm going to open it up to the public for anyone to join in to get that, because I'd rather have the word out on how to behave around bears than anything else. So I will keep you all posted on the upcoming webinars, but I'm going to be developing that schedule soon. So if you have any ideas or anything you want to see, by all means, reach out to me and let me know of a topic you would like to hear about. So with that, I thank everyone, and I will be in touch with you soon. So thanks, folks.